At this point, our entire rig is complete. We've added all the functionality that we set out to do from the very beginning, and we're ready to call this guy done. However, there's still a few things I like to do to prepare this scene for the animator to make things a little easier for them to work. The first thing we can do to help is create what's called selection sets for our controllers. In a lot of cases, the animator is going to be selecting these one by one, but in certain circumstances, like the beard or the spine, for example, they're going to want to grab several of these controllers at once to get the proper movement. So instead of them having to select each one individually each time, we can create a selection set that they can refer to instead through the outliner. So I'm going to open up the outliner to start, and then I'm going to take each one of these beard controllers one by one, holding shift and selecting them, and then I'll go up to create up here in the toolbar and down to sets, and we'll create a quick selection set, and we'll call this beard set and hit OK. And now in the outliner you'll see we have a new object in here, and if we click this plus sign, we'll see all of our beard controllers listed in here. So instead of going and selecting each of these one by one, the animator can just click on this top one and shift select the third one, and they have that same control over the beard. The next one we can create is a selection set for the spine. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to start up here with the head, go down to the neck, and start selecting all the different spine controllers that we have, one by one, and I'm going to select them in order. And I'm also going to include the root controller, just in case, because sometimes you want to rotate the root controller along with the spines in certain circumstances. So with those selected, I'm going to do that same thing. I'm going to go to Create, down to Sets, and create a quick selection set. And I'm going to call this one Spine Set, and hit OK. And now, just like before, if we click this plus sign, we'll see all of our spines one by one listed here in the outliner. And we could easily drag select these and rotate them and get that kind of movement that we want. The next selection set I like to create is one that contains every single one of our controllers. And I like to do this because every once in a while you're animating, it's sometimes necessary to grab all these controllers and key them at the same time. So I like to include it in my scene as well. So to select all of these, instead of going through and selecting them by hand in the viewport, we're going to do that in the outliner. It's a little easier to see everything. So I'm going to go into our character group and open up that window. And I'm going to go into the rig group here and open that up. And we can already start to see some of the curves that we have set as our controllers. A lot of them, though, are actually nested in a hierarchy underneath our center controller because we put them there. So I'm going to shift and click on this plus icon and extend that entire group so we have all of these exposed. Another group that has other controllers underneath is the eye controller. We have those two other eye controllers underneath our eye controller. So now that these are all visible, we can just go through and select them one by one and grab every single one of our controllers. So I'm going to start up here at the top. We have our global controller. Go through the eyes here, and I'm going to grab these foot and arm controllers here. And now I'm going to click on the center controller, and I'm going to look down and I see that most of these are controllers, or all of these are controllers, until it hits the hand, because then we have IKs. So I'm just going to shift and click on the last object in here, and it should select all of these objects just before we start seeing IKs and constraints in the hand. So it's just a little quicker than doing it one by one. I'm going to look down. We have our pauldron controller next, clavicle, and our hand again. We have a pauldron again, and finally we have this pelvis controller here. So just to make sure we grabbed everything, we can just quickly Control H to hide all these controllers. Just make sure we're not seeing any in the scene. And then we can undo that to bring back our selection. So I'm going to go to Create, down to Sets, and Create Quick Selection Set. I'm going to call this Global Set because it contains everything. So I'm going to collapse all these and then take a gander in our global set here and make sure we grabbed everything. And that looks pretty good to me. The only thing is I should probably change this to a lowercase l so it is consistent looking. And now I think we're good to move on to the next thing I like to do, which is create a few more layers down here in our layers panel. Right now we already have a layer made for our lights, so those can be hidden and restricted. And we also have a layer for our model that we use to restrict our model while we were working on the joints and such. So in addition to those, I'd also like to make a layer for the skeleton. And that way the animator has the ability to hide or restrict the skeleton. Because in a lot of cases when you're animating, you don't really ever have to go into that level of the hierarchy. You can just ignore the joints themselves and just deal with the controllers. So all we have to do for that layer is go into our outliner, open up our character dwarf hero group, go into the rig group and find our root joint. And since this is the start of all our joints, and when we select it, it kind of highlights all the joints, we can actually just have this root joint selected, go over into the layers panel, and select this last icon here, which is create a new layer and assign selected objects. So we can create that layer and then test it by hitting this V box here. That'll change the visibility to on and off. We can make sure that that's working the way we expect it to. That's looking good. And we can also double click the name, go in there, and we'll name this skeleton layer. And I'm going to color this with this kind of off shade of blue, just so we have kind of a color coordination here with our joints. And you'll see in the viewport, we've actually changed the colors of the joints as well. So it kind of neutralizes the way that looks so it doesn't look as cluttered. And now they can be restricted and also hidden from the animator. The last layer I like to make is a layer for the controllers themselves. And this is just to make it easier for the animator to hide all the controllers so they can get a better view of their animation. Say if they're just about done with an animation, they want to see what it looks like without anything in the way. They can hide all the controllers at once. So to do that, all we have to do is go into our outliner and find all the controllers that end up on the top layer of our hierarchy. So the ones that are showing right now before we've opened up any of these controller groups are the ones that we need to select. We don't have to select any of the children because they'll be affected by the layer just as the parent is affected. So I'm going to select the global here. There's the eye, left foot, left arm pole. I'm just going to go down this list and select all of these. And then I'm going to go back over into the layer panel and create our new layer and assign the selected objects. So I'll click that icon. And again, just to test, we can click on this V to make the layer visible and invisible. We can make sure that we've grabbed all of the controllers. And it looks like we did a pretty good job. So I'm going to unhide those. I'm going to go into the layer by double clicking it. I'm going to rename this con layer. And I'm also going to change the color of this layer to yellow so it's easier to see. And I'm going to hit save. And now when you deselect all the controllers, you can see that our controllers have changed color. They're a little easier to see now, and it just makes the entire process easier to work with. And also, it's made me realize that we have these inverse joints still visible. So we'll want to add these to our skeleton layer and also hide them. So it's easy to add stuff to layers. All you have to do is select them. I'm going to select the parent, which is the heel of each of these systems. Then I'm going to go over to the layers panel and right-click over the skeleton layer. And I'm going to say add selected objects, which is the second option here, and click that. And as soon as they jump into the skeleton layer, they disappear because that layer is hidden. So we can expose these by clicking the V on that layer and hiding them. So I'm going to expose those, and then I'm going to just hide them with Control H because we don't really ever need to see those ever again. And then I'm going to hide the skeleton layer once again. And now we can take a look at how clean everything looks and how accessible everything seems. And it should make it much easier for our animator to work with this once we hand this file off to them. To further finalize this scene and to tidy things up a little bit more, I'm going to go back into the layer panel and I'm going to move this model layer just underneath the con layer. So I'm going to middle mouse drag that and place it underneath the con layer. And that puts it a little bit more in order of relevance for the animator. I have the lights at the bottom because they're never going to touch those. Skeleton, they're probably never going to touch. They may end up needing to control the model at some point, and the cons they'll always need to have access to. So I'm going to make sure all of these are set up the way I want them to be. And now I'm just going to go over to the outliner and shift collapse all these different groups. And I'm going to close the outliner up, and I'll place the viewport camera in kind of an interesting way, just so it's a little more fun for them to open it whenever they get this file. Just for fun. And I'll save that. And we're ready to pass this asset on down the pipeline. We came a long way, but our dwarf hero is finally ready for animation. Now that we know about set-driven keys and a few useful ways to apply them to our rig, the animation process will be all the more smooth. And thanks to a touch of foresight and a little bit of courtesy, our scene is all nice and tidy for the next person who opens this file. Thank you for following along with my course. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you learned a lot of useful things. But of course, the learning doesn't have to stop here, not as long as you're a Pluralsight. So if you're interested in learning the other facets of game development, you can find more courses to help you with every step of the way.